This is Dan Meehan for Fight News Australia, and today we have the smiling assassin, David Martinez, who takes on Dimps Gillies at Eternal 61 at the new rescheduled date of September 11th. David, how are you?
Yeah, very well, man. As long as that date remains the same.
Yeah. Well, who knows at this stage? Fighters these days, they come from all walks of life, really. So how did you stumble across MMA, and when did you decide to go on this crazy career path?
Oh man, like it all started when I watched that movie, Never Back Down, and I was like, oh, that's an interesting sport. I'd like to give that a go. And I went and jumped in my first cage fight with no training whatsoever, and you can imagine how that ended up. But I just fell in love with it since, and it's been about maybe 8, 9 years now, and still loving it.
Yeah, right. So how do you end up in a cage fight without having any sort of training? How did that come about?
Well, people weren't really doing background checks when they were accepting fighter nominations, and I was like, yeah, he's good to go.
Right.
Had no idea that I had no training, really.
Oh, there you go. Now, like most married men, you're managed by your wife. So how does that dynamic play out, and how do you sort of balance sort of business and pleasure, I guess, in that sort of dynamic?
Yeah, sometimes it feels like I'm being micromanaged, actually. But yeah, no, it works really well because we have the sort of differing personalities. So she's much more suited to the manager side of things, whereas like if it was just me, like people would just come to me like, "Oh, you want this fight?" And I'd be like, "Yep." So we'll pay you this much. I'm like, "Sure." Whereas like she's able to negotiate that and actually like pick things for me, as opposed to I'd probably just say yes to everything, and that's not going to go down well in the long run. So yeah,
Absolutely.
she's been fantastic for me in that sense.
Yep. And you were last in action against the now lightweight champion, Dan Hill, back in October.
Yeah,
So obviously the result didn't go your way, but how do you reflect on that fight, and what was it like to be in the cage with Dan?
yeah. I remember thinking like, I'm like, how did I lose? And every time I rewatch, like particularly the second round, I'm like, I still give myself that round like very close, but I just like I was the one pushing the action. I actually outlanded strike wise, and I had more time in like control with the grappling. Like he was able to stuff most of my takedowns, but he didn't really do anything off of them, whereas I was landing strikes off of them. And so it seems to me that like just stuffing my takedowns shouldn't really score for him. But all that aside, man, the result is what it is. And Dan went on to become the champ, so good on him.
Yeah, I guess
And yeah,
that loss has sort of aged well, then, hasn't it?
yeah, it certainly has, man. And Dan's an incredible like athlete as well. Like he's very unassuming. And like when you look at him in his fight style, you don't think too much, but he's really, really good at what he does.
Definitely. And you were booked to fight again back in April, but had to withdraw due to injury. So during the COVID era, obviously opportunities are pretty hard to come by. So how disappointing was that to lose out on that fight?
Uh, Crushed, man, crushed. Like I managed to hurt my ribs to the point that I was like stuck in bed for a week, couldn't move at all. Oh, but there was a bit of confusion and with me withdrawing from the fight because I believe I got injured. I think it was roughly about 7 weeks out, and took about 2 weeks to sort of assess what was going on. And we decided, like, I can't continue because I'm not going to be able to train for at least another 3 to 4 weeks, at least while it heals. So I had to withdraw. However, uh, it seems that my opponent, Aiden, he didn't find out that I had withdrawn until like 3 weeks out from the fight. So that was a bit confusing, but it is what it is. So it was unfortunate.
So, as you mentioned there, your opponent was scheduled to be Aiden Aguilera, and he's known to be one of the nice guys in MMA, and we're not about sort of stirring the pot here at Fight News Australia, but there has been a bit of a war of words since all that kind of came, all that sort of went down. So where do you think that one's come from? It seems kind of out of character on his side.
Oh, it does, man. But I think it's just to drum up attention for like a potential match between us. And to be honest, like I thought this was going to go down well, like because we were both going to fight it on the card in Townsville. So it just kind of shaped in the ways like we both fight. If we both get wins there, then we fight each other toward the end of the year. The war of words, sort of like it's a good WWE script going there, but unfortunately, that card then fell through, and just the repeat lockdowns between all the states just means like getting matched up with each other isn't the wisest at the moment. Just because either of us can go into a lockdown and then we're left scrambling for another opponent. So I've taken the idea of just focusing on like Queensland-based opponents on Queensland shows for now until I can trust the government to get things under control.
Yeah, makes sense. And I believe the injury was a rib injury. It can sort of be a bit of a tricky recovery for a fighter, especially. Have you got any lingering effects from that, or are you all clear?
It seems to be clear now, man. Like it was giving me a bit of like any chest pain that you feel like gets you worried. You're like, oh no, am I making it worse type thing. Yeah, but no, I seem to be all good on that front, so I'm very happy about that.
Right, and your opponent this time out, as mentioned off the top, is Dimps Gillies. How do you view that matchup?
That's that's sort of like a dream matchup for me, man. In terms of just like he's such a fun guy. I couldn't imagine anyone else I'd rather be in the cage with than Dimps, because he brings the fight, and he's going to throw down, and yeah, it's just an exciting fight for us.
Definitely. And when you close your eyes and visualize the fight, how do you see yourself getting the win?
Well, I would obviously have to rely on my wrestling against him. I don't really want to just straight up try to box him. Yeah, but yeah, so wrestling control, and that's pretty much how I see myself winning.
Yep. And obviously, this one's been pushed back on two occasions now. So while it's not uncommon particularly in the COVID era, for fights to be rescheduled or cancelled, how difficult is it to ensure that you're sort of peaking at the right time when the fight day keeps moving?
That's the danger of trying to peak, man. Like if anything happens or things get shifted around, like it throws everything out of whack. Not just like on the physical side, but on the mental side as well. You're measuring it up. You're like, oh, I've got this many weeks left, and so like, and you really go full on with the discipline, and then it gets shifted, and it's kind of like you have to, like, you don't just want to stack on more work because then you'll burn yourself out. So you kind of have to recess and then reschedule everything and try to line up a peak further down the road. And at the back of your mind, you're always wondering, is this going to happen again? Is another random lockdown going to happen and we're going to have to reset everything again?
Is there any difficulty sort of staying motivated like that when you there's all this uncertainty around? Am I preparing for a fight that's not going to happen? Do you have any trouble sort of staying motivated and staying focused?
Well, yeah, after the last lockdown, like, and the whole thing with not sure if I was even fighting Dimps anymore. It's like the motivation goes right out the window because the training's not fun, the diet's not fun. These things they're necessary evils in a sense, but you need motivation to push yourself through them. And if you don't think there's anything being worth it at the end of it, why would you do it? Why would you suffer? So yeah, you need to be real good at like redefining your goals when these things happen, and then sort of keeping yourself motivated.
Yeah,
if you get what I mean.
Absolutely, yeah. And yeah, speaking of training, you're a product of Ignite Martial Arts up there in Queensland. There's been a few sort of UFC caliber fighters come out of that gym over the years. So what's the training room like these days up there?
Yeah, man. Like, seem to be getting a lot of people in from like all around the place. Like people from Brisbane train up, like come up to train with us. People from further up the coast are coming down. Like, it's becoming a real melting pot with all sorts of talents coming in and through. You got John Martin Fraser just recently joined with us, and now he's the eternal middleweight champ. And yeah, there's a bunch of guys coming up from mainly from Gamebred. A lot of amateur champs out of there, particularly the XFC. Yeah. So yeah, it's a real good room of killers on any given day, man.
It sounds it. It looks like you've been you might be sharing a camp with former UFC and tough veteran Ben Wall. Looks like he might have a fight booked of his own next month. What's it like training with him?
That's exhausting, man. And like he never lets up. Like his pace is ridiculous. And yeah, it just keeps coming forward. And if I'm going to be wrestling him that day, I know I'm going to be pretty tired by the end of it. But freaking love training with Ben. Like, he is fantastic, man.
Anyway, yeah, as mentioned, you've fought some of the best fighters in Australia at this point. You're a former Eternal lightweight champion yourself, a Coastal Combat champion, I think, as well. Assuming, of course, that you're successful at Eternal 61, where do you sort of want to get to? What are your goals in MMA in the long term?
Well, I was thinking more like if I get a win there, like put me in with the title for the next one, because had a close fight with Dan and had beaten Mumford, but Mumford's now out and we've got Jack Becker, and so that's a bit of a different story. But yeah, so I'd say a win here at least puts me in line or among whoever else is in line. Yep. And so I'd say yeah.
And what's the end game? Sort of where do you want to get to overall in your career?
Oh, well, obviously fighting in one of the bigger shows would be pretty nice. But way back when I started, like, it was always UFC, which I imagine every MMA fighter wants that. But lately I realized, I can have just as much fun fighting in Bellator 1. And, so just to fight in one of the bigger shows would be real awesome, regardless of which one it is.
Yeah. Do you have a timeline in mind? Do you sort of, a timeline of when that call up might come, or how many wins you might feel like you might need to reel off? Do you have a time in mind?
Well, I always say, man, like the next 3 fights can drastically change, and it's like your career trajectory. So if, like, if you go back 3 fights, you see massive differences. Like, rewind me 3 fights and I'm an undefeated lightweight, 2-time Australian champion. And then 3 fights before that, just been Mike Wilkinson, and, former UFC vet type thing. 3 fights before that, and I'm a 9-1-1 amateur who's just about to turn pro type thing. So yeah, I always look at 3 fights being, game changing depending on how they go. So yeah, that's where I'm looking. Like, if I perform well in the next 3 fights, then anything's possible.
Definitely. All right, David, before I let you go, do you have any sponsors or anyone you'd like to shout out? I'll hand over to you.
Oh, man, I just want to give a quick shout out to Author Supply & Co. Like, they make fantastic rash guards, man. I'm looking forward to competing in some of them. So big shout out to those guys. And I might throw in the Angry Baker as well. Just a quick shout out to them for their awesome sausage rolls. I'm not going to be able to have them, obviously, until after the fight, but I'll be looking forward to that as soon as the night's done.
Yeah, maybe you can treat yourself to an Angry Baker sausage roll post-fight. All right. Yeah, David, thank you so much for stopping by, and yeah, all the best at Eternal 61.
Awesome. Thank you for having me, bro.